but I interpret the quotes in my own words. You know what we should probably do? I'm just going to live right now. We're going to pull up an Acer set. I don't know if I'm live or like screen share this. Maybe that's copyright. I don't know. I don't really care. And I'm going to show you what I mean by interpreting the quotes and how I plan them, because this is essentially the origin of, what am I doing? Gamsat, where are you? Desktop, University, Gamsat. There you go. Section, practice questions, full exam questions, Acer. Okay, I'm going to screen share. And here we are. Hope you can see me. The purple ones are nasty from memory. So are the reds. Let's just pick this. We'll see what's in good old green. Oh, I loved that question. This is like giving me nostalgia. Where are you, section 2? That would be a section 1. Here we are. Cool. Richards was in the group this week. I'm sick of looking at it. So is laughter. Are you in substitute active in laughter? We'll just go with these ones. So most people are going to look at these 5 quotes and they're going to say, all right, the theme is rich or money or wealth. And of course, they're going to reduce wealth to fiscal wealth or financial wealth and ignore that there are other forms of wealth, such as spiritual wealth or relationships. Your ability to smile, I think, makes you quite wealthy. But the first error they're going to have is they're going to go, okay, we're not going to define what wealth is. We're just going to call it fiscal wealth, and that's fine. You're probably not going to get massively marked down for that, but you have missed an opportunity. And then they're going to go, instead of reading the quotes, they're just going to go, okay, cool, the topic is wealth. And they're going to think, right, what have I got to say about wealth? And they're going to write something about money. And the issue is that you've reduced the theme and kind of got it off. Like, all right, so let me pick the third quote. Few rich men own their property owns them. That is not to do with wealth. That is to do with, so it's to do, when I read that, I see that the obsession with accumulation has a deadening effect on the human spirit, and your need or fear, which engenders an fanatical, sometimes, at least in my experience in contemporary Western life. Note how I just qualified that. I didn't say that it was absolute. That wealth leads to a fanatical obsession with fear leads to a fanatical obsession with security. And we perceive indeed that when we put our roots down, or that when we accumulate financial wealth, that we are secure. The problem is that we're seeking security outside ourselves. And for as long as we do that, we will be insecure. Security only comes when you find security from within. So to me, that's not about money at all. I could do this for every quote. My point is, though, that whoever R. Ingersoll is had more to say than just money. You know, so your first error is, and when I do that for each of them, there's going to be 5 completely nuanced different ideas that are being provoked or by Acer, by showing us that. And so your first error is calling them all wealth. And then your second error is you won't even necessarily respond, even if they were about wealth, to the part of the quote that is about wealth. You'll just kind of say what you think about wealth. And then, you know, you might try and use the quote or a couple of words in the quote and think you're being really smart, or think you're being really on prompt. So how did I get on that? Oh yeah, quotes. So I plan, but the first part of planning is looking at the quotes and thinking, what might I have to say from my life experiences, current understandings, by cross-referencing various things that I've exposed myself to, such as opinion pieces from these journalists or from the minefield. You know, I try and, I said earlier in the webinar that being good at something essentially boils down to finding whoever is the best at what you want to be good at and being in the seat next to them and copying. So I be in the seat next to people that are really bloody smart, really like philosophers, the best journalists. And I expose myself to these materials. And through doing that, I'm able to draw on them when I consider these prompts. So first I look for what I might have to say. As I answered earlier in the webinar, I found better success in not responding to them all and picking one particular quote. How I planned depended on task A and B. I do them differently. So in a task A, the backbone of my task A is logic. So I'll just go back to that example then. What was it? Few rich men own their property, their property owns them. Is this a task A? Yes, it is. Okay, so my contention, let's just say I want to say that from what I said earlier, security is, or humans have a fanatical, or my experience in the contemporary West of humans is that there appears to be some kind of fanatical obsession with security that arises from fear, which is fundamentally limiting to the human condition, and misapprehension of the importance of cultivating security internally. That might be my contention. And I then, in order to prove that contention plausible, need to come up with two premises which, if I posit and prove correct and you believe, that necessarily imply the correctness of my contention. A famous example is, in order to prove that Socrates is mortal, the premises are that all philosophers are mortal, premise one, and that Socrates is a philosopher, premise two. And if you believe that all philosophers are mortal and that Socrates is a philosopher, it necessarily follows that Socrates is mortal. So applying that to what I just said, which in a nutshell was I have witnessed an obsession with fear, which feeds into or rather an overgrowth or an undercurrent, a subliminal undercurrent of fear, which leads to a fanatical obsession with security and a misapprehension of the importance of cultivating internal security. How would I prove that? Well, the first bit is I've witnessed, that needs no proof. The next bit is a fear. Okay, so there's fear, I need to prove there's fear, which has led to a fanatical obsession with security. So my topic sentence one is going to be something like, there is a, it's hard to do the top of my head without writing. Okay, the natural reaching for security is a byproduct of feelings of fear is going to be my topic sentence one. And then the purpose of body paragraph one is to prove the validity of that topic sentence. So I now need to connect reasonably that a natural or common human response to fear is to reach for security. I might use motifs in philosophy to expound on my point, or psychology. I might, for example, use Freud and the unconscious, or Jung and the shadow. And off the top of my head, I don't know exactly what I'd write. Body paragraph. How would you prove security in fear? I think that you could use examples in COVID, for example. Toilet paper buying seems a particularly trivial example that comes to mind. But the interest and fanaticism about the material world imbuing upon us or lending us security, at least only in perception, is perfectly exemplified by the tribal behaviour of people during the early stages of the COVID-19 pandemic, at least in Australia. Now, I've given a great example that is on point. I've got a topic sentence that feeds into the conclusion, but the job's not done. An example doesn't prove a point. It's an example of a point, but it doesn't mean that there aren't counterexamples of that point, or indeed more counterexamples than the example I gave. So I must evaluate the example in light of the point. I might not go through the rest of the essay because this could go on forever. But the point is, the majority of that body paragraph should be the evaluation of my point in light of the theme. So I've given you an example of the toilet paper buying. I'll now go, what was the theme? Their property owns them. Cool. So a departure from normal ways of interacting with our peers or members of society with decency, respect, and dignity, which was shown during this example, is indicative of deriving from or arising from fearful emotions, which may, I mean, I can't abjectly or definitively say that it was fear that was, or that led to a departure from normal modes of interaction with each other. But I think it's reasonable to say that there is fear during COVID and that that behavior was fearful. So that's the evaluation. And then finally, there's the link. And this, by the way, is just high school stuff, PEEL, P-E-E-L. Point, example, evaluation, link. Most people will go, here's a point and here's an evaluation, or here's an example, and they think the job's done. Maybe if they're good, they'll go point, example, evaluation. But the thing is, the way I evaluate something is, again, through the prism of my kind of ideas about the world. It doesn't necessarily, it's not necessarily clear to the marker how exactly your evaluation feeds into the contention. It might be clear that it feeds into the topic sentence, but not the contention. So you make a point to explicitly go, you know, this shows how property, I might use the words property owns them, but yeah. So anyway, my first point is that fear leads to security. And what was my contention originally? There's a misapprehension of the importance of cultivating security internally. So the second premise would be, can't really prove that there's a misapprehension, but if I can prove that there is something to comprehend about the importance of internal security, and that, at least in my experience, that it's not commonplace in society that people would have that idea or comprehension of security, then I think I can reasonably conclude that there is a misapprehension broadly about the importance of cultivating security. And if I've done that in the format that I just described, and my two premises are plausible, reasonably within 30 minutes, and you agree that yes, there is a misapprehension about the importance of cultivating security internally, and you agree that that fear drives an obsession with security, which is misplaced, and causes people to diverge from traditional ways of interacting with each other decently, then it necessarily follows that my contention is correct. So you see that there is an internal structure to task A, or to a good logical argument. My introduction narrows or acknowledges the theme that we're talking about, wealth or property, but I can't talk about the whole topic. There could be multiple books written about that. So I need to talk about an aspect of it. And then essentially I end up, it's like a spear point. I end up at the end of my introduction with my single strong opinion. And by the way, you should write this down, it's a good point. Something that really, really helps force you to write in this very logical way is when you come up with your contention, which should be the last line of your introduction, say to yourself in your head, the single strong opinion that I am going to argue for the remainder of this essay about the focuses that I've mentioned, which you would have done in your introduction, is, and then you write your contention. The single strong opinion that I have about the focuses that I mentioned that I'm argue for the rest of the essay is, and then I would say my contention. So fear leads into security, blah, 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 right? And then your topic sentence should do the same. The single strong point that this paragraph will argue in service of the proof of the contention is, I'll say it again, the single strong point that I'm going to prove plausible for the rest of the paragraph in service of the contention is. This forces you to do two things. It forces you, one, to write something that does lead into the contention. So to write logically, linearly, clearly. It also forces you to have one point, which aids concision, clarity, and succinctness, all qualities that ACE are looking for, and mentioned in the psychometric, the list of 10 psychometric properties that I have in the philosophy of section 2 success, which I suppose we can go into later, or just get the book. And it forces you to write in service of the contention. If you're doing all those things, you probably, I mean, all that's left to do is to have good ideas. We were discussing earlier about how language and structure is assessed in isolation or in a vacuum, but it's assessed in service of the thoughts and ideas. If you're doing this, your language and structure is probably good because you've got a point, you're arguing a point, you're on topic. And then the conclusion just becomes, well, given point 1 true and given point 2 true, it necessarily follows my contentions true. Drop my mic. Boom. And then if you've done it well enough, it is mic droppy enough that there's like this almost lingering sense of not quite quiet, but at its best, it's like, how it occurs to me is like an old martial arts master that like some young upstart has like challenged and he doesn't know that he's like a master. And then, the master just really gracefully just like drops him. But then you reach your hand out and you pick him up, which is why I take care in my conclusions. I was saying earlier about jumping to different trees in the orchard to grab different intelligences. If I have argued logically, analytically, precisely, surgically, it is now judicious, wise, intelligent, high yield to swap gears and go into an entirely different faculty. Once I've dropped the mic, I then take care to pick the person up. So I go, look, this is one view. I acknowledge there are other views. It is not practical or reasonable to think that we're all going to link hands and sing Kumbaya. Or, I might say, there are other people that what was my point? Fear, insecurity, and misapprehension. Cool. So it is completely the right of anyone to define security or the importance of coming to security internally versus externally in whichever way they like or which suits them and their interests and their happiness. Just because it's mine doesn't mean others need to share it, but we don't need to all share it to progress this point. So what I've done there is I've acknowledged that there are limits to my own view, that my view isn't objective, that there are other views and that they are valid within their respective ontologies too. And then I go, we don't need to agree. I don't need to impose mine on you, and you don't need to impose yours on me. There's actually an overlapping area here. And I find an overlap. So you, for example, might think that it's totally fine and good and whatever to, a capitalist or a billionaire might be like, no, I'm really happy with my external wealth. And I might be here, not a billionaire and, a pauper and a monk, and go, well, actually, you're mistaken, and the security that you've worked your whole life to achieve, which could be taken from you in a moment and which you're fearful of, you could just have internally, and I don't need anyone to do that. But we can both agree that regardless of how we individually define security, there is benefit in interacting with one another when our security is threatened in socially productive and respectful ways. So for example, during COVID, even when we do feel fearful or that there is a lack of security, there is a benefit in a consensus of the worthiness of treating each other with dignity nonetheless. So I've said, here's my view. I acknowledge there are others. They don't need to reconcile, but hey, look at this overlapping area. And what this shows is an ability to reconcile disparate worldviews. Often in medicine, there is a team leading dimension. And if you have the ability to reconcile different worldviews, then it's another point. And then I'll usually finish off my task gaze with kind of a figurative hook and kind of show that more, not creative writing, but that kind of ability to be poetic or stylistic. Now, it's in my space right now that people are like, what the fuck? Obviously, you don't need to, I'm just telling you what I did. But that's how I do task B differently. I'm not sure if we really have time to go into the nuance of that. I do it entirely differently. But I do explain it I've got a blog on task B aesthetic. I need to write like a book on task B. It's on my list. But I do have a blog on task A that's very long and goes into way more depth than that. I've written like 70,000 words in the past few months on this stuff. So as Dr. Scott Fraser pointed out, more than a thesis. So I can't really explain it all now, but that was a really long-winded way of answering that. Sorry, guys. I've been the only one that's talked for like ages. Does anyone want to